All right. Welcome to, I guess, the first episode of Discussions in Darkness. My name's Will. I will be your host for the evening. And tonight's guest, I will hand it over to him and let him introduce himself.
Yeah, my name is Nate Tenhundfeld. I'm currently an associate professor at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, serve as chair of the psychology department. And yeah, my focus is on human psychology, human cognition.
Okay, perfect. That sounds right in line with what I was kind of needing as far as the topic goes. Like I said in the email, the topic of conversation tonight that I wanted to talk about is this idea of perception versus reality. To give you a little bit of context, especially for the audience, since this is a paranormal kind of discussion. Um, Back last year, with my birthday, everything we did, I went on a paranormal investigation for my birthday. And the number one thing that I realized while I was there, when it's the location that I was at Old South Pittsburgh Hospital in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee. And I noticed a few things. So before I got there, I was already on edge. I was already kind of freaking out. I've grown up watching these shows and I've never done them. So, this was a whole new experience for me. So I didn't really know what to expect. Um, so, getting in there, I was horrified trying to, I didn't know what to do and I didn't know what to expect. So as I was walking through, one of the first real things that I kind of experienced was this sensation of darkness and how it almost felt like the darkness got darker somehow. I don't entirely know how that could have even been a thing, but the other people that I was walking around with that evening did kind of notice it as well. So I don't know, shared perception there maybe. But anyway, so after that, the next real experience that I had that evening was we were on the third floor of the building. And the third floor, it's known to have a lot of different experiences, some pretty hard experiences, specifically for women and different things like that. There's been a lot of claims on the third floor, and while we were up there, I was doing a couple experiences or a couple experiments with these cat ball toys that they're little motion light up toys. It rolls around and goes off. And while we were up there, we had a few of them set out, and one of them started going off. But it would always happen while it was behind my back. I was nowhere near it or anything like that. So I don't, in my thought at the time, it was like, I don't know. I could see if maybe the building was vibrating or something like that. But if
Mm-hmm.
that was the case, then in my mind, it would have made sense that all of them went off, not just one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, that was just a few weird experiences. And in my view, like, if those are the things that they describe and define as paranormal, okay, it seems like the phenomena is real, but what is it? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's the ultimate question that I kind of walked away with that evening. And the other real question I had was, how much does this, I hope that sound didn't just come through. I just got an email. So let me turn notifications on real quick. And we are in the middle of that. Okay. So back to what I was saying. So the main question that I had as far as perception goes was, it's an abandoned hospital. My I've only been in hospitals that have people in them. And even then, on top of that, like, hospitals have always been a weird thing for me, anyways. But, being in these different areas of the hospital that normally people wouldn't be in, and the fact that it's an empty hospital kind of just made me wonder, okay, how much is the environment around me and how much is me just making
Mm,
things up.
mm.
So that's what kind of led me
Yeah.
to this point. So, anything that you might have that could kind of help me figure some of those things out would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting, right? I think one of the things that um, we really, at least that I talk about a lot in my intro level psych classes, is the fact that your brain is not focused on conveying reality to you, right? Its entire purpose is to help you survive. And there are a host of things in which we can point to and say, you know, this is a deviation from reality, but there is probably an evolutionary explanation for why your brain creates this illusion that it does, right? And so I think the classic example is the dress from a couple years ago, right? Everybody
Okay.
either saw it as black and blue, white and gold, or whatever the combination was.
Yeah, I've seen a new one of those out recently too, and it was just, I
Mm.
hate you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because it, they are so compelling because you can have two people in this case, sit at the same computer, look at the exact same stimulus, and have two very different perceptual experiences, right? And so, the again, the brain, and we'll get to, I think, if you're interested, talking about the sensory systems, but the brain's goal in navigating your environment is to essentially help you survive, right?
Okay.
And so, with that, we have evolved a set of um, systems that help us make sense of stimuli in the world, right? So, obviously, our visual system, right? We're
Okay.
picking up on um, the photons of light. Our auditory system is picking up on pressure waves in the atmosphere. Olfactory and gustatory, or smell and taste, are based off of the chemical smell, or the chemical senses rather. But it it's one of those things that they seem self-evident to us because we've all got. I mean, provided there's no deficits there. We've all got experience with these senses that it, to imagine an existence without one of those senses is hard to do, right? In the same way that somebody who has never had sight would struggle to understand the concept of what blue is, right? You have the experience of blue. You and I can convey what the sense of blue is, but somebody who has never seen before is not going to have an understanding of what the color blue is. And so all of this to say, you know, it is very possible that there are there are stimuli in our environment that we may not be entirely capable of being aware of, but that manifest in a variety of ways. So I think the classic example, and then I'll kind of turn over to you for your thoughts here, but um, most people have had an experience where it feels like you can tell somebody's staring at you,
Yes.
and it's not clear what of your sensory systems would be picking that up. Now there are suggestions that maybe you're picking this up visually and you're processing this kind of pre-consciously, um, and you're not aware that it's something you're thinking about, but in reality it's something that you are still aware of because of your visual system. um, but I mean, there are a host of things that um, we have these weird experiences where we can't immediately explain with our sensory systems, and so I think it's entirely possible that you know we just have not conceptualized one of the means of communication between our environment and ourselves, so to speak.
Okay. I that actually makes a lot of sense to me. Um, because I like one of the little notes that I made here was this survival issue in a paranormal context. That was one of the thoughts that I did kind of have, is that, bar like in my view, really, as far as the paranormal question goes, I think that belief kind of doesn't entirely matter whether you
Mm,
believe it's real or not. It's a matter of what you can kind of prove.
hmm
And that's where, like, part of my thought was that, maybe this is something that's, because it's an abandoned hospital that is decaying. And,
hmm
you can, like, there's one whole section of the hospital that has a tree growing up through it. So you can't even get in there because the building's
mm,
unstable. So,
hmm
my thought was, maybe what we're perceiving as paranormal is something that's trying to help us get out of a bad situation. Like, trying to
Yeah.
help lead us to that survival idea.
Well, and I think that's really astute, right? I think anytime you're going into these types of conversations and ideas, like my bias is I would love for there to be something paranormal for me to
Yeah.
explore, and truly, like, I would love it if we're living with intimate interdimensional creatures or
Yeah.
ghosts or aliens or what have you, right?
Yeah.
I want that to be true, but I also understand that in the absence of evidence, one of the things I have to try to do is figure out, okay, well, what has an explanation, and at what point am I failing to get an explanation? And I think what you just brought up was a really interesting kind of, you know, a, explanation for what potentially could be going on, in the sense that our brains are really attuned to looking for causal relationships, even if there are no causal
Yeah.
relationships, right?
Yeah.
Something happens, there's a result. Your brain wants to say, okay, this caused that. And so I think it's easy in those contexts to then say, okay, something happened and I got this spooky feeling,
Yeah.
and there very well may be some sort of paranormal explanation. But I think there's also, like you just kind of pointed out, this sort of, your brain is looking for reasons to be scared, right?
Yes.
The reptilian part of your brain is looking for, lions on the prairie. It's saying, get out of here if anything's wrong. And so that becomes a really interesting junction of, okay, do I have heightened senses that I'm picking up on things I wouldn't normally pick up on? Or is there actually something to pick up on that would, in fact, have a paranormal explanation, so to speak?
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Sorry, my brain just left me. um,
Oh, that's all right.
but yeah, no, okay. So that's really
So let me
interesting.
ask,
Yes, by all means,
yeah,
keep
let me ask
going.
you this. Like, it, what is your default bias towards the paranormal? And at what point do you feel like there is a faith associated with it versus you can definitively prove something paranormal?
Okay, so my default bias here is that I do believe in, ghosts and spirits and things like that. I can't,
Mm-hmm.
as far as like the experiences I described, I
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that there, like, it's something, but as
Yeah.
I've gotten older, I'm definitely an evidence guy.
Yeah.
And so, I do have that drive towards evidence, but at the same time, I am trying to walk that line of not rationalizing anything away. Because
Mm-hmm.
that is
Yeah.
definitely one thing that I've realized about myself, is that I use intelligence and intellect to protect myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't want to, if something is legitimate, I don't want to, no, 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 I don't believe in that. It's not real.
Yeah.
I don't want to dismiss it out of hand. Now, to come around to the question of what you were talking about faith and a religious perspective on it, some things that I have been looking into personally, there is a way of accounting for this phenomenon, specifically from a Christian context.
Mm,
And there, you know, there, and actually in a Christian context, there is both disembodied spirits that were never entirely human, and there are human dead spirits that, for whatever reason, never passed on. And I think in Catholicism, it would refer to it as purgatory. I'm
mm.
not Catholic, so I don't necessarily know.
Yeah, me
Um,
either.
my personal view on it, at least as of right now, it is constantly evolving and changing, things like that. But the way that I would define my own views is I I would describe myself as a Christian Gnostic.
Mm,
Um, I do believe that God is real. I do believe that spirits and, you know, the afterlife is real. I do believe that there is a way of proving these things, even if it
mm,
is only in a linguistic context.
mm,
Because you know that term God, it's I had some insight on it, at least for myself a while back, that I described it as I described that term God as a delightfully vague term because it infers an idea, but what is that idea? And that idea varies from person to person. What I call God,
mm,
you might not call God.
mhm,
But at the same time, and I know Jordan Peterson talked about it a little bit, that
mm,
everybody believes in something.
mhm,
Everybody has a God, quote unquote, in some sense. It's just a
mhm.
matter of figuring out what that God is.
Yeah.
And so to bring that back around to the paranormal context, you know, like I said, there are ways of accounting for these different things. I'm still new to it, so I don't entirely
Mm,
want to go too far down that road just yet. But
mhm.
it is something that I'm learning, and I am, you know, trying to figure it out. So you know, maybe in a future, you know, maybe we can have a future conversation.
Sorry, I don't know
Totally
what the dogs
fine.
decided. Maybe something paranormal going
Hey,
on
who
in the
knows?
background there. Yeah,
Who knows?
exactly.
So, but yeah, so you know, that's where I generally stand on it. I do. I am hesitant to say that I want to believe because, you know, in a sense, I do. But at the same
Hmm.
time, I feel like saying that I want to believe kind of sets me up for, you know, accepting something that might not necessarily be true.
No, I completely agree. I think it's a great way of thinking about it. And I think to kind of build off of that, my earlier point of I would love for there to be something. I think there is kind of the the engagement at the fantasy level, and then there is engagement at like the scientific inquiring level, right? I
Yes.
think um, in the same way that I love to get kind of lost in the Harry Potter
Yeah.
world, I I, I would never say, okay, because I enjoy that, I therefore am going to look for proof of wizards.
Exactly.
But yeah, and I think that's an important distinction, right? Because I think you also brought up a really good, interesting point before, in the sense that too often people become hyper fixated on explaining away something because it seems crazy, right? It seems as though, like, okay, there's got to be a rational explanation for this. I don't know what it is, and so I'm just going to go with whatever I can grasp at. Um, but I think that is kind of an inherently lazy way of going about these things. Either you know there is nothing remarkable about what you have observed, but you learn a new way to explain it, or there is something remarkable about what you've observed, and you start learning more about what's going on, right? And
Yes.
so, I think one of the things, the longer I'm, in this field of psychology and the more I think about these things and whatnot, you start realizing this incomprehensible complexity that we have not even begun to scratch the surface of when it comes to the human mind.
Yes.
Like, we conceptually, from a functional sort of level, know what consciousness is, in the sense that we can essentially turn it on and off in your brain, right? Stimulating the right part of the brain, we can make it pass out, right?
Yeah.
But in my field of human interactions with technology, there's this constant question of, at what point would or even could an AI become conscious, right?
Yeah.
And so if we are focusing on the consciousness, and I promise I'll bring this back to the paranormal here in a
Totally
second,
fine.
but like if we are focusing on consciousness itself, we have an understanding of consciousness because we believe ourselves to be conscious, but we don't know what gave rise to that consciousness. Would the same configuration of biological material always give rise to this self-awareness, or is there something tertiary that's going on, in the same way that religion has frequently had this conversation about, you have the mind, you have the brain, dichotomy, this dualism, Cartesian dualism, right? And so this is where then I think the question about paranormal, supernatural, just alternative explanations for what's going on in the world start to get interesting, because I think it takes a level of humility, but also a recognition of really where we are, to say, we don't really know a lot about why the brain works the way it does and why our experience is. And so what else is there?
Exactly. I can totally agree with that. And that's one thing that I feel like, what you were talking about earlier about wanting to believe, and how that kind of informs your view. In my view, that inverts the distinction of belief. Like, you so want it to be real that you're,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay, I want to believe it's real, therefore it's real, and you don't need the evidence to do it. And that's where part of me goes, no, that's not a good idea, because
Yeah.
just for practical reasons, what if you're wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Just the basic question there is, what if what you think is so true and accurate isn't? How do you
Yeah.
cope with that? So, the in my own mind, the way that I try to deal with that is, I try to take this view on reality that, I can't say what is and is not possible,
Mm-hmm.
but I try to live in a world where anything is possible. The question is it probable? Is
Mm-hmm.
is this certain set of situations a probable excuse or a probable reason why
Mm-hmm.
something happened? And that's
Yeah.
where evidence and evaluation and scientists and the science view comes in. Um, at least in my own
Yeah.
brain. So
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, I think it reminds me, there's a quote from Thomas Jefferson. He was writing about University of Virginia, which he helped found. And in it, he describes the institution itself and says, something to the effect of, for here we're not afraid to follow truth wherever it may lead, nor to tolerate any error so long as reason is left free to combat it. Right?
okay,
I think it's a very similar idea of, there is absolutely a propensity for some folks to just dismiss supernatural, whether that is the traditional religion, or it's ghosts, or it's
yeah,
interdimensional beings, right?
yeah,
What have you?
yeah,
Um, because it seems irrational, or something that is not explainable immediately, right? But again, I think, going back to that initial idea, you and I have an understanding of what blue is because we have a sensory system that picks up on blue, right? If there are, in fact, more dimensions to reality than the space time continuum as we think about it, right? That um, it stands to reason that an appropriate sensory system would pick up on these things. Or, if like the idea of gravity is something you directly observe the result of something, but you don't observe gravity directly, right? We're
Yeah.
not observing, at least my understanding. I'm not a physicist,
Yeah.
but my understanding is I drop my phone, I see the consequence of gravity,
Yes.
right? But I could easily create an alternative interpretation of what's causing my phone to fall towards the ground that is independent of gravity.
Exactly.
And so, yeah. And so I guess, I mean, like, it just seems to me as though you're starting to ask these really interesting questions about, what's out there, what can I explain, what can't I explain, and the things that I can't explain are these things that I don't have the knowledge or the language to explain, or are these things that are unexplainable at this point, just in general?
Exactly. And that's just in the few, like, my family went on paranormal investigation with me for my birthday,
Mm.
and that was one thing that I did. It was interesting watching, how they process it. It's
Mm.
there. And I don't want to necessarily harp on my family or anything like that. I do love my
Mm-hmm.
family, but there are, I've seen other, like, Sam and Colby videos, and
Mm.
other paranormal YouTube people who have, like, you can tell that they're struggling to explain it.
Mm-hmm.
They've experienced something weird, and their brain's going, I don't have a way to explain that, so it simply reverts back to something that they already want to believe. and
Yes.
and that's where it, in my view, that's a little bit of a disservice to yourself, because you're I can see it as a survival, like we were talking about earlier, and a self-preservation kind of thing. But at the same time, when does self-preservation become a hindrance? When does
Mm.
it stop you from
Mm-hmm.
growing? When does it stop you from learning? um
Well, and I think you're exactly right in the sense that it we are not good with uncertainty. We like certainty. We like definitive. We like black and white.
oh, yeah.
We like right and wrong. We're not good with sitting in the environment of I don't know, and I'm not sure I'll be able to figure this out, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I think makes some people so uncomfortable with religion,
Yeah.
of this idea of faith. You just got to sit on it and say, I don't know. Some people go to, the next step of say, I do know, even though I don't have direct evidence, I do know. Right? But some people, I know some very religious folks who say, I don't know, but this seems perhaps right to me. So I'm going to sit in that uncertainty. And I think being able to sit in that uncertainty is really where you start being able to make some interesting, I feel like, explorations into what's real, what's not real, what is reality versus my perception of reality.
Okay, yeah, that it's interesting that you mentioned certainty like that, because I actually just finished reading a book on certainty. It was a really interesting book. It's a German, it's a he was a German philosopher, I think, or he, maybe
Hmm.
not even that. He was, like, the book itself isn't necessarily a theory
Hmm.
of certainty, as much as it is
Hmm.
like a collection of ideas that he had, that the people who put
Hmm.
the book together, because he wrote it in the last, like, 5 years of his life. um
Hmm.
and he wrote it in the 1950s, I think. um, which in my mind is a very interesting point, because it's, right after the collapse of Nazi Germany, and
Hmm.
he made a lot of really interesting insights. But at the same time, it's like, because it's not a unified theory, like, I just a little bit of research I've done into it, people are like, well, maybe not, I don't know, it's interesting, but he doesn't really push any sort of idea out there as far as what certainty really is. The book was called On Certainty by
Uncertainty.
Ludwig Wittgenstein. I think that's how you pronounce the name.
I'll have to check it out.
It's a really interesting
Yeah.
book. It's a really short book. It's only about 100 pages long.
Yeah.
So I, definitely something to read if you or the audience or anybody is interested in that topic. I definitely suggest reading it. But again, you'll probably end up with more questions than anything. At least I did. But
But that's exciting. That's the fun part
exactly,
for me.
exactly. Well, that's the part that I enjoy too. Like I think the thing that really drew me to this concept of paranormal is that it's an exercise in reasoning. Whether
Hmm.
like I said earlier, whether you believe or not, it's kind of irrelevant. It's
Yeah.
it's the reasoning behind it, and that's I've as I've gotten older, and like I was saying about being geared towards evidence, I find that stuff really really interesting. So
Mm-hmm.
and so that's where all this came from.
Yeah.
So
No, and I love it, man. I think there's there are a lot of the supernatural things that I think are dismissed by the scientific community, but there are some folks in the scientific community who are trying to understand these things. Like there, and I wish I could remember who the academicians were, but there's a lab that focuses on children who report having lived past lives, right? And being able to find some of these stories that have verifiable facts, right?
yeah,
They're able to tell you things about people that existed that it is not just by chance. And I
yeah,
won't, undermine those stories by trying to recall what they were. But there's also there's a book called God in the Afterlife, talking about the experience that those who have had near death experiences have had, right? So they they're clinically dead, they come back to life. What was their experience, right? And he tries to address. Sorry, I don't know why the dogs again. I think on the supernatural.
yeah. Hey,
Yeah,
they say dogs and animals can see stuff like that. So,
exactly. Um, yeah, sorry about
oh no,
that,
you're
but
good.
yeah, the and attempts to address the critiques that some of the scientific community have had of saying, this is just the last attempts to try and process stimuli in the world and is giving sensory hallucinations, right? And he starts trying to debunk this and then talk about a scientific approach. But I think what you're doing is really interesting because I feel like the inquiring approach, the inquiring skeptic approach to the paranormal is, I think, a really exciting one rather than just being a mindless believer versus, a skeptic naysayer.
Yeah.
I think what you're doing is really interesting.
Well, thank you. I feel like this is definitely a different line of questioning than I've seen in a lot of paranormal things. Because
Yeah.
and that's partially why I wanted to go this road, because all those, the Zach Baggins of the world, and I know there's some drama surrounding him. I'm not getting into that. But it's you I feel like wanting to believe so deeply like that is, yeah, like I've already said, it's a hindrance, and it just doesn't
Hmm.
it doesn't do that. But I realized I just got off topic of where I was originally going. A lot of the paranormal stuff these days does operate from the view, I believe, I'm just trying to find, I'm trying to convince you why you should believe. And
Yeah.
that's, in my view, that's not what I think the best view here is, or the best approach is. I think the best approach is find the evidence and let it speak for itself.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Right. And you're talking my language fully. This whole confirmation bias. We talk about that a lot in cognitive psychology. Of you have a theory that you're not trying to prove or disprove. You're just trying to find evidence. I guess you are trying to prove that
In
theory,
some
but
ways,
not
yeah.
with any sort of disconfirmatory,
Yeah.
evidence. And so, No, I think it's critical.
Yes. Well, that you mentioned Thomas Jefferson earlier, and that actually reminded me of one of my favorite Thomas Jefferson quotes. Is fix reason firmly in fix reason firmly in her seat, and call to her tribunal every fact, every opinion, question with boldness even the existence of a God. For if there be one, he must more approve of the homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear. Um,
Wow, that's good, man.
yeah, I like actually one of the podcast guys that I follow. I heard it from him, and
Yeah,
hearing it is like that makes so much sense.
yeah,
And it's I hesitate to say irrational to not do that,
yeah,
but I know that we're not exactly rational creatures.
yeah.
So
Eh, well, and you know, well, we may be irrational. I think it is fun to try and rationally explain the irrationality of the human, but also the irrationality of kind of what we observe. Right? It doesn't always seem like the world we live in is perfectly explainable. Right? It always seems like maybe there's too big of a coincidence for something to have happened. Right?
yeah, and that's
Um,
that's a big point in the paranormal reasoning.
mhm.
Is the timing of it.
Yeah.
If I ask for, if there's a ghost here or a spirit here to say something into this mic, and then I
Mm,
hear something,
mm,
that's kind of hard to dismiss because the timing is too good.
yeah.
So that is a part of it.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I think it's really interesting. So let me ask you, if you could even say that there would be an end to this journey, what are you hoping comes of this?
my goal, in my view, um, I am trying to better understand the phenomena of shadow figures. Um, because that, and from what I understand in the paranormal world, that is a different phenomenon altogether. It is
Mm,
closely tied to the paranormal, but it's something else altogether. So I guess the ultimate goal that I'm kind of leaning towards, that I'm kind of shooting towards, is to better understand that phenomenon. Um,
mm,
because I have, like, personally, I have seen a shadow figure, and it was one of the strangest experiences of my life that I can't, even to this day, I still can't quite explain it. Because, like, so the context behind this sighting, I guess I could describe it, was, me and actually my mother saw it too. We were pulling into our driveway. We're pulling into the driveway. I'm coming home from work one night, and as we were coming up the driveway, the garage door was open, and we saw a human figure walk out, almost kind of like it was presenting itself, and like
mm,
it kind of just stood there. It walked out, kind of presented itself, and then as we came up the driveway, it kind of just disappeared into nothingness. And
mm,
like my thought was, okay, maybe the angle that we saw it caused it. Maybe it's just
mm.
matrixing.
Yeah.
But as I was playing around with the angle, at least in my view, is like that, moving one way and then moving back, it wasn't there anymore. Like the angle I
Mm,
saw it from originally, it wasn't there anymore. And the
mm,
thing that makes me think that it was a shadow figure was that it exhibited body language. It
mm,
showed human body language. And in fact, actually, both of us thought that it was my stepfather, my mother's husband. Like, it had that shape to it. It was just a black
interesting.
figure. And we're like, I
Interesting.
that's weird. I don't know how to explain that. Like, even she was just like, "Did you see that?" I was like, "Mm-hmm. I saw it."
Yeah.
So, the fact that somebody else saw it too kind of makes me go, okay,
Yeah.
it's not just me. There's something else there. And so, to bring it back around to what your
Man.
question was, I think that's what the ultimate goal here is is to better understand that phenomenon.
Mm.
Because I do think it's real, but what is it?
Mm. Yeah.
And so that's my driving goal here, is to better understand that. If I manage to catch evidence of ghost or anything else, cool. But
Yeah.
that to better understand everything around it, I guess, would be the ultimate
Yeah.
goal there.
Well, and you have to wonder how many times a single person experiences something and dismisses it because there was not somebody else there. Right? The number
Exactly.
of times where I say, "Yeah, my eyes were tired.
Yeah.
I didn't really see whatever." Right? It's interesting, man. I am fully on board with the idea that there is more to reality than our sensory systems can pick up on, and I have yet to experience anything I don't feel like I can explain. But I know some very sober people who have had, and I mean sober in kind of
Yeah.
all the best ways, but who have told me like paranormal stories that defy their explanation and defy my explanation. And you start getting to those and think, it takes a certain amount of hubris to say, no, come on, there's nothing else.
Exactly.
Right? Very well could be. And it's exciting that people like you are, trying to figure out what this is.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it that like what you were talking about, that it I always kind of see it as a check in the positive category. If people aren't they aren't seeking attention for it.
Mm-hmm.
They're in fact, I as part of it, I was talking to my brother a while back, before we went on the birthday thing, and even he was like, I have had weird experiences that I cannot explain. And he definitely comes to it from a stance that I think it intimidates him a little bit. Um and I can understand why. I can
Yeah.
understand that. And so I guess there's, maybe that's another part of it too, is that I do think that there is some sort of comfort in this knowledge, but I don't know what that comfort would be. Um, because
Yeah.
another quote unquote experience after my granddad died. I saw him like a week later. I only saw him once. He was sitting at my desk in my room. It terrified the crap out of me.
Yeah, I would
But
imagine.
that was also one of those things that I was so able to no. It was a week after he died. I'm sure something was going on up here. I was just processing it, trying to deal with it.
Yeah.
And now these things that I've kind of looked into kind of make me go, maybe it wasn't.
Yeah.
Maybe
No.
if maybe it was just one of those things, like we was talking about with purgatory earlier, that little chance, that little time frame of going, hey, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And then moving on.
No, I mean it again, I think is so easy for smart people to say, no, come on, I was hallucinating, or I was tired, or my eyes are just playing tricks on me. And in a lot of cases that may be true. In all the cases it may be true. But I think to not ask the questions, I think is somewhat doing a disservice, right?
Yeah.
I think it is it's not just a fun, but I think it's an interesting exploration, right? I mean, you look at 20 years ago, the idea of UFOs was, you'd get laughed out of society,
Yeah.
and now they're having congressional hearings on it,
exactly.
right?
And now it's like, oh yeah, UFOs are real. We get it. Move on.
Yeah.
It's like, hold on.
Yeah, exactly.
Hold on. What?
Yeah, that was the quickest of like, fringe conspiracy to accepted mainstream now.
Yeah.
That I've ever seen.
You're questioning that? Oh, whatever.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so, I think we would all do well to have kind of the level of humility to say there may be something else we can't explain yet, right?
Yeah,
Maybe it's shadow figures, maybe it's aliens, maybe it's who knows what.
yeah,
Right?
yeah. So okay, well that I guess I think we might have come to the end of the discussion. I don't necessarily have any more questions. Um,
I I think this was fantastic, man. You've given me a lot to chew on. I'm gonna enjoy kind of sitting on this and thinking about this. And
well, I thank you as well. You've given me a lot to really think about, and I'm sure as I edit this, and I know I'm gonna watch it a few more times or listen to it a few
yeah,
times to really kind of get some of the finer points. But you've really given me a lot to think about too, so I appreciate
well,
that.
I appreciate that, man. I
Yeah,
always enjoy our
me
conversations.
too.
I think they are
Me too. You're
they always force me into a place I'm not used to going, and I appreciate that.
well. Thank you. I chalk that up to the Asperger's. I
I think you're just creative, uh,
well, thank you.
and I don't mean that pejoratively. Like I think you've got a very inquiring, interesting mind, and I enjoy having those conversations.
Well, like I said, thank you.
Yeah,
I don't do particularly well with compliments, so I'm learning.
I don't trust people that do. So yeah,
So, all right. Well, in closing,
awesome.
anything that you'd like to say? I know you recently came out with a book.
I did, yes. It has nothing to do with this,
Doesn't
but
matter.
it's yes, no, it's about usability evaluations. If you go to Amazon and just type in usability evaluations, it's with me and a colleague, Jerry Burpee. So,
Awesome. And
but
so what exactly are usability calculations?
evaluations, yeah.
Evaluations.
So making things easier to use, right? The phone you use, being able to pick it up and immediately intuit how to use things, right? How to go about more effectively doing what you want to be doing, and yeah, making it safer, more fun to use, and so that's my day job. The night Nate enjoys these types of conversations.
Well,
So
awesome. And you said you can get it on Amazon?
yeah, go to Amazon usability evaluations, and it's up there.
Okay, perfect. I'll try to include a link somewhere whenever I post this.
I appreciate it.
So yeah, so I kind of look at this as a little bit of free advertisement for my guests too.
I'll
So
take it, man.
so
Any I can get.
all right, well I guess that's it. So let me go ahead and
Awesome.
end this.